Hey guys, Billy here, and today I'm going to be making a Sunfury Fire Mage guide to be ready for when Season 2 starts. Fire is going to play differently than it has since the past 3 or so years, pretty much because Sun King's Blessing is not really the play anymore, it's kind of falling off. But I wouldn't really worry about it because playing without Sun King's Blessing is actually way more simple, so let's dive into it. So like I said, this guide is going to be mainly focused on the Sunfury gameplay in Mythic Plus. Frostfire is viable, and funny enough, Frostfire has also seemed to have dropped SKB as a talent when it's traditionally always ran it. But I don't believe the Frostfire build to be as strong, so I'm not going to entirely cover that side of the tree, but it's going to mainly be focused on Sunfury. This is currently your standard Mythic Plus build for Sunfury, and yes, with this build, you're going to be Flamestriking. You can swap other talents around for an Ignite only build. Like you could put Quick Flame into Convection because you're never going to cast Flamestrike. You can put Fever into Firefall because you're going to probably cast a lot of Pyros. Wildfire can go to Master Flame if you need more AoE on Ignite. But at the end of the day, I do believe that this is the best build to play. I believe if you needed Prio, you would just swap the Prio rating because this build, the only talent that actually buffs Flamestrike, everything else kind of buffs both Flamestrike and Pyro. But the only thing that actually buffs Flamestrike is Quick Flame. So it's pretty universal for single targeting and AoEing. When it comes to Flamestrike versus Pyro, at around 5 targets, Flamestrike will start pulling ahead. However, if you desire Prio damage, or if it's a bunch of trash on a boss, just like this clip here, then you still just Pyro. If you Pyro on big pulls, on capped AoE, it will be less overall damage. But if you notice that it speeds up the pull if a Pyro mob dies fast, then by all means, Pyro. You have to make the decision yourself, pretty much. Most of the time, I'll probably just Flamestrike. For trinkets, I can't really talk about much here. I've liked Reverb Radio as a good passive trinket since the spec loves haste, but other than that, I've been messing around with two on-use trinkets, pretty much rotating them combust after combust, because this spec does extremely low damage outside of combust. But like I said, nothing is set in stone yet. I do not know the best trinkets. Just I've been trying double on-use for the time being. So stats I won't really get into much into as well because it's always a sim yourself angle. But I will say that when you take a max level eye level sim from the Mage Discord and you look at the stats section, you got crit, haste, verse, and mastery. You can see that haste has over 28,000 stats, whereas crit has 3, mastery is 6, or verse is 6, mastery is 8. It's safe to say that haste is a really good stat. So if you want to look at what stat to stack, just probably go a lot of haste. You probably want mastery as well, but that's for that's what the raid bots will tell you. All I'll tell you right now is that you want haste. The best race is dwarf. Sorry. Hyperthread Wristwraps. Yes, this item is back from BFA, the glorious days of Fire Mage, right? So if you remember this, then you definitely will remember these. And if you don't remember these, then let's talk about it, right? So what it does is it refunds CDR on your last 3 used spells. And also, this is not shared with trinkets, so you can use this item freely whenever it's off the global. You just have to find a keymine for it. It is to be noted that the Mage Discord says it is within a 0.8% increase than just using normal bracers. So if you're just learning Fire Mage, you could probably wait these till later. But from my personal experience, in big high haste scenarios like Lust and PI, these things feel absolutely insane to play with. For the usage of the bracers, you just want to make sure that 2 of the 3 CDR spells hit Fire Blast. The sequence is going to look somewhat like this. Ideally, when you're in Combust and you just run out of Fire Blasts, you want to do it like Fire Blast, Flamestrike, or Pyroblast, Fire Blast, just like the pictures above. So after those 3 spells, you hit your bracers and should refund you a bunch of Fire Blast. A side note I'll include in here is if you start with high Spellfire Spears, you want to try to delay until your Glorious Incandescence is used. Because watch my Fire Blast, right? I'm going to get a bunch of refunds. I'm going to get all the refunds and then I'm going to use the bracers. But most of the time, if you start with low Spellfire Spears, you probably want to counter the situation. So now I'm going to get into the rotation a little bit. So because of SKB no longer being the play, we play this talent Unleash Inferno, which if you read the tooltip, it encourages you to spend as much Fire Blast, Phoenix, whatever spells in your combustion as possible so that you get the maximum amount of cooldown reduction. Because, like I said, outside of Combust, you do very low damage. This kind of brings back the OG playstyle of Fire Mage from like Legion to BFA, where your Combust is extremely strong and anytime you're at a Combust, very weak. So alongside the emphasis of combustion as a Sunfury Fire Mage, Sunfury makes it so that when your combustion ends, you gain Hyperthermia, which essentially allows you to spam Pyro and Flamestrike, or Flamestrike, whatever, for the entire duration of the Hyperthermia buff. I would recommend a weak aura for this. I'll link one that I personally use, but you can use whatever weak aura that works for you. During Hyperthermia, your goal is just spam out as many Pyroblasts or Flamestrikes as you can. Now, during that Hyperthermia buff, there is some Fire Blast min-max usage you can do. Pretty much, you want to use Fire Blast to complete heating ups because a hot streak Pyro is more damage than a non-hot streak Pyro. So if you have the amount of Fire Blasts available to do that, then definitely go for it. Mainly, this is under the conditions of if you have a lot of haste because your Fire Blast cooldown is extremely shorter, or if you have shifting power after, so you'll pretty much replenish all your Fire Blast. So, but if you feel like you're starved on resources and Fire Blast, you don't have to Fire Blast during it. Diving into some of the rotational stuff, this is a sample opener for single targeting, or rather igniting pyroblasting. If it's convenient, you'll precast Fireball, Scorch, or Pyro, whatever is comfortable for you, and then you'll Feeding Slims right after. And after that, you'll queue up Fireball, you'll Fire Blast Combust with that cast, and pretty much it'll give you a double Pyro, so you'll Pyro into Fire Blast Pyro, and then after that, you're pretty much just following the priority of Fire Blast / Feeding Flames and Combust. So once you've fired off your combustion and your mid combustion, the priority list is going to look something like this. Pretty much Fire Blast above all by far. So if you have a Fire Blast, you're going to look to use that first. After that, it's Feeding Flames. After that, Scorch. It doesn't actually matter if you Scorch or Feeding Flames too much. It's mainly important that you are consuming all your Fire Blasts, though, for sure. So here is a quick sample of a combustion with my precast not critting. So pretty much I'm just rotating through my Fire Blasts. Once my Fire Blasts are done, I'm going to hit Bracers and just continue Fire Blasting. Once my Fire Blasts are gone, I go Phoenix Flames. When my Fire Blasts are back, you're back to the Fire Blasting. It's worth to note that if you're not using Bracers, then you would just go to your Phoenix Flames quicker. If your precast crits, then you'll just simply open with without the Fire Blast and you'll just open with the Combust like this. For AoE combusting or AoE flame striking during your combust, it is pretty much the same thing as the single target picture you saw earlier, just you would replace flame strike with the pyros. But pretty much when I'm in Mythic Plus, what I like to do is, obviously I'll hit Mirror's Image. I'm not going to put that on there, but just, hit Mirror's Image, then you'll Phoenix Flames, and then you'll precast Fireball, Scorch. I usually do Scorch because you can move around. It's kind of comfortable. And then you'll just do the little Fire Blast into double Flame Strike, just like how you do with a single targeting on Pyro. And then you'll just follow the same rotation as you did earlier, where it's just like, Fire Blast is the top priority, and it's just Feeding Flames and then Scorch. So here's a sample AoE combustion. I will do the precast Feeding Flames to get that heating up going. And then I will do the Scorch, Fire Blast, Combust, double Flame Strike. And then I'm just rotating through my Fire Blast till it's gone. Bracers, and then I'll Fire Blast, go through them all again, and go to Feeding Flames, and you just kind of rotate through the priority list, right? Obviously, Fire Blast is top priority. Once I'm in the Hyperthermia phase, I'm just going to be hammering Flame Strikes as hard as I can. Because I have shifting power, I'm going to use a Fire Blast to extend my Feel the Burn. And then I will just shifting power it after and just kind of like rush to my next combustion. Now, by rushing to your next combust, what I mean pretty much is you're just going to be fireballing as much as you can, trying to get fish for crits for your next combustion. I will say that when your combust is coming up, you want to try to hold your fire blast so that you can go in with the max amount of resources, right? So like when your combust is around like 10-second cooldown, I would start trying to like, go light on your fire blast, if that makes sense. So now I kind of want to talk about the bread and butter of Sunfury, which is the Spellfire Spears into Burden of Power into Glorious Incandescence. So pretty much every time you consume a Pyroblast or a Flamestrike, you will gain a spear. When you get 6 spears, you gain Burden of Power, which makes your next Pyroblast stronger. You don't really play around that at all. The damage of Pyroblast, don't play around that. But every time you consume that Burden of Power, you get Glorious Incandescence, which is what gives you those Fire Blast refunds. So pretty much Fire Mage is in this constant loop of spending hot streaks to get those spears, to get the Glorious Incandescence, get the refunds, and then with those refunds, you kind of just build more spears. And it's kind of like a constant loop over and over and over. And with high haste, it feels incredible. So Spellfire Spears that builds that Glorious Incandescence is a 30-second debuff, which means you ideally want to chain it pack to pack. Like for example, this mob dies and I have 2 stacks ready, right? So that means I'm going to go into this pull with 2 stacks. Sometimes you'll have more, sometimes you have less, right? So if you have more, you can kind of expect a very early Glorious Incandescence, which means, I mean, if you have bracers up, which means you'll bracers later because, like I said, you don't want to overlap the refund on Glorious Incandescence and the refund on bracers. So when you're in Mythic Plus, generally try to save stacks pack to pack. You can also do this trick where at the end of a pack, you can kind of hold a hot streak, and then when your tank is going to the next pull, you can kind of like milk the hot streak and just Flamestrike at the last couple seconds to get a refresh on the duration. Some like random tip that's like extremely sweaty is you could also build up your stacks before a key starts, right? Like you could get a hot streak and then wait till combat drops, which combat would drop right about now-ish. And then right when the key starts, you would like flame strike, start the key, and then you'd carry over these 4 stacks into the first pull. Some tip also as well is for some reason when Mythic Plus boss combat starts, it completely wipes away your Glorious Incandescence or your Burden of Power. So if you're ever at the tail end of a pull, make sure you spend, and you have Burden of Power, make sure you spend the burden into Glorious Incandescence, or else it'll be completely wasted, right? Like, for example, I'll show you. I have a burden. Now let me go pull the boss. I can make it there in time. I think I can. Watch, it'll go away. Right now I have no spears. But if you start with 5 spears, they will not disappear. Now, there's something I want to talk about when it comes to Mythic Plus, and that's the timing of combustions, right? So, like I said before, when you don't have cooldowns, you do healer damage. You don't do dank damage, you don't do little less damage, you do probably even less than healer damage. Your damage is entirely terrible outside of combust. So that being said, when you press combust, you need to make sure that you have 20 seconds till the pack dies because you need to make sure that your entire combust gets the globals in and your hypothermia gets the globals in. You need both of those to get full value, or else you need to hold your combust. Because if the pack dies mid combustion, you will be left with like 50 seconds on your combust, like a random number, right? Like a lot of time on your combust, which means that you are doing healer damage until you can farm it back. So it's better to just hold it, right? There's also pretty rare scenarios where if the key is high enough, if you have enough haste, whatever it is, key's high enough, pack lives long enough, where you can actually get 2 combustions on a pull and still have it for the next pull. Now this is really good, right? Because if you press one combustor and hold it for too long, it's actually bad. So you wanna like in your head time the pack and see if you can get 2 combusts or one. Like you wanna ask yourself if the pack lives 20 more seconds. Like in this scenario, I know that when I go forward, there's gonna be travel time to the next mob pack, right? So I have time to just like rip another combust. And this is like pretty much something you'll see probably in high keys, but it's something you kind of want to try and play around. For the usage of shifting power, it's mainly used for your combust cooldown. And sometimes in incredibly high haste scenarios, like for example, the first pull of theater, it kind of happens a lot. If you look at my cooldown, my my combust CDR on this pull, you'll notice that I get my combust back without even using shifting power, right? Like by the time my hyperthermia is done, I'm already back into combustion. And this is really good if you can do this, right? Because then it allows you to actually use shifting power when you need it for the combustier, right? Because like this, I don't need to use it for CDR. So pretty much only use shifting power if it has a purpose of getting an extra combust on some pole, some way, some shape or form. Real quick to talk about time anomaly, sometimes this talent can just randomly proc you a combust. It's hard to play around sometimes because there's times where I've casted shifting power and it procs mid shifting power. Just if the opportunity arises, try to get as many crits into it as possible because during combustion your cooldown reduction is like really high, right? So if you get a good combustion proc from this, sometimes that can chain you into another combust without using shifting power as well. A simple rule for shifting power is that only use it if it gives you the full CDR of combustion. One small tip I have too is during your downtime of combustions, you want to make sure you're pressing things like barrier and images because these are buttons that you can preempt, these are defenses rather, I should say, that you can preemptively put up where, during combustion, you don't want to press these buttons, right? Like when you press combustion, you're locked in for 20 seconds. You want to make sure you get the most out of every global because you want the most CDR for your next combustion, right? So during your combustion, you want to prioritize using buttons like Alter Time and Ice Cold, because these two are off the global and you can use during Combust, right? And you don't lose a global. So just know that outside of your Combust, you can use globals like images and barrier to like preemptively put up your defensives so that when you are in Combust, you don't have to actually press it. Like mirrors images are a really good one, right? It also goes for AoE stops because obviously you don't want to die and you don't want things to go off, so you got to do what you got to do. But ideally, you would only press damage globals during Combust, and outside of Combust, you are incredibly helpful and like defensive. This also goes for AoE stops, right? One more thing I want to talk about is do not die when you press Combust, okay? Let me show you what happens when you die, okay? Imagine you press Combust, boom, boom, boom. Cool, cool. And then what happens? You die, okay? Now this is what's gonna happen. You cannot farm your Combust spec. You are quite literally AFK for a minute and a half. So if you ever die in your Combust, just instantly be depressed because there's honestly nothing you can do. You can literally just like fireball to like get your Combust back and like shifting power. But like you are, like I said, you are doing terrible damage. Do not die in combustion. So the TLDR I'll give you when you play fire pretty much is just make sure you are locked into your combustion for 20 seconds. Make sure that you're playing around your spellfire spears when you can. Chain it pack to pack. Do not die. And just make sure you use shifting power in a smart way. It's all about combust uptime. The more time you're in combust, the better. The less time you're out of combust, the better. And make good decisions on your combust timing. That is the main thing.